the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship mystery. Lean in, because this one has been waiting since 1872. It has outlasted every explanation offered for it, absorbed every theory, and returned every investigator to the same place, standing at the rail of an abandoned ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, looking at a breakfast table set for a meal that was never eaten, and understanding that some questions do not yield to the tools we bring to them. The Mary Celeste has long been regarded as one of the greatest maritime mysteries ever recorded. That description has never seriously been challenged. Part 1. The ship. The brigantine Mary Celeste was built in Nova Scotia in 1861, a two-masted cargo vessel, 102 feet in length, sturdy and well-proportioned, the kind of workhorse ship that moved goods across the Atlantic without distinction or fanfare for the ordinary years of its early life. It had changed hands several times, had weathered at least one serious accident, and had arrived, by the autumn of 1872, in the ownership of a New York shipping company that had loaded it with 1,700 barrels of commercial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. The captain appointed to the voyage was Benjamin Spooner Briggs. He was 37 years old, experienced, deeply religious, and by every account a careful and competent mariner. He had captained several vessels before the Mary Celeste and was known among those who had sailed under him as a man who did not take unnecessary risks. He brought with him his wife, Sarah, 30 years old, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Not an unusual arrangement in the era, when captains' families sometimes accompanied them on longer voyages. The crew numbered 7 men, all experienced, drawn from American and European maritime backgrounds. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed Pier 50 in New York Harbor, bound for the Strait of Gibraltar. It would never reach its destination. Part 2. The Discovery. The brigantine Dei Gratia left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste, following a similar Atlantic route toward Gibraltar. Its captain was David Morehouse, a Nova Scotian mariner who knew Benjamin Briggs personally. The two men had, in fact, dined together the evening before the Mary Celeste's departure. On December 4th, 1872, approximately 600 miles west of Gibraltar, the lookout aboard the Dei Gratia spotted a vessel on the horizon. It was moving erratically under partial sail, yawing in the wind, its course undisciplined in a way that immediately suggested something was wrong. Morehouse brought his ship alongside. He hailed the vessel. No response. He sent 3 of his crew across in a small boat to investigate. What they found aboard the Mary Celeste has been argued about for 150 years. The ship was in generally sound condition. Its hull was intact. There was no evidence of fire, collision, or structural damage. The cargo, the 1,700 barrels of alcohol, was almost entirely undisturbed, though investigators would later note that 9 of the barrels were found empty. The ship's pumps were functional, though one was partially disassembled. There was some water in the hold, perhaps 3.5 feet, a quantity that experienced sailors on the Dei Gratia found unremarkable for a transatlantic passage in autumn weather. The lifeboat was gone, and every person aboard the Mary Celeste was gone with it. Part 3. What was left behind. The inventory of what the boarding party found and what it did not find is where the mystery of the Mary Celeste takes root and refuses to be dislodged. The ship's cargo was largely intact. The crew's personal belongings, clothing, pipes, boots, razors, were in their quarters, undisturbed. Captain Briggs's sword was in the cabin. Mrs. Briggs's sewing machine was in the captain's quarters. a piece of fabric still threaded through it, mid-project, as though she had stepped away from it momentarily and intended to return. Sophia's toys were in the cabin. The ship's register and some navigation documents were missing, but the navigation instruments were present. The last entry in the ship's log was dated November the 25th, placing the ship at a position approximately 600 miles from where it was found 9 days later, meaning it had been sailing, crewless and unguided, for more than a week. The galley stove held food in various stages of preparation. A meal had been in progress. No one has ever adequately explained why 10 people, a captain, his wife, their infant daughter, and 7 experienced sailors, abandoned a seaworthy ship carrying a full cargo in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, taking almost nothing with them, in conditions that the ship's log and the physical evidence aboard gave no indication were extraordinary. They left. They took the lifeboat. They were never seen again. Part 4. The Theories. The Mary Celeste has attracted theories the way wrecks attract barnacles, thickly, persistently, and at every depth of plausibility. The alcohol cargo has generated the most sustained serious attention. Commercial alcohol at the concentrations being transported can produce vapor that accumulates in enclosed spaces, specifically in cargo holds, and can create the sensation or the reality of imminent explosion without actually igniting. Some researchers have proposed that fumes from the 9 empty barrels accumulated in the hold and vented through the hatch in a sudden release alarming enough to cause the captain to order an immediate abandonment of the ship. A temporary panic evacuation, tethered to the ship by a rope until the perceived danger passed, the rope subsequently parting in heavy weather, the lifeboat and its occupants lost to the Atlantic. This theory is coherent. It accounts for several of the physical details. It does not explain why a man of Briggs's experience and composure would order a complete evacuation of a sound ship in response to vapor rather than investigating its source first. It does not explain why personal belongings, weapons, and navigation tools were left behind if there was time to launch a lifeboat. Others have proposed seismic activity, a submarine earthquake creating a waterspout, or sudden terrifying sea disturbance that convinced the crew the ship was sinking when it was not. Others have suggested mutiny, piracy, insurance fraud. None of these has survived serious scrutiny. The crew showed no signs of unrest. The cargo was untouched. The insurance theory foundered on the absence of evidence that Briggs had any financial motive. Arthur Conan Doyle, 12 years before he created Sherlock Holmes, wrote a short story in 1884 directly inspired by the case, a fictional account that introduced several fabricated details so compelling that they entered the popular record as fact, confusing subsequent investigation for decades. The ship in his story was called the Mary Celeste, a spelling error that became so widespread that it persists to this day in casual references to the real vessel. Even the mystery has its own mysteries. Part 5. The Atlantic. The Mary Celeste was salvaged, taken to Gibraltar, subjected to an admiralty inquiry that produced no conclusions, and eventually returned to service. It changed hands 17 times in the 13 years after the abandonment, as though no one could keep it for long, and was finally deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in 1885 in what investigators believed was an insurance fraud by its then owner. The hull refused to sink promptly, as though even destruction required more effort than usual. Benjamin Briggs, Sarah Briggs, Sophia Briggs, and the 7 members of the crew were never found. No wreckage of the lifeboat was ever recovered. No body was ever identified as belonging to anyone who had been aboard the Mary Celeste. They went into the Atlantic in December 1872, and the Atlantic kept them. The section of the Atlantic where they disappeared is not dramatic. It is open ocean, gray water under gray sky, 600 miles from the nearest significant landmass in the shipping lanes that vessels have used since the age of sail. Thousands of ships have crossed it since the morning the Mary Celeste was found sailing by itself. The water there is approximately 15,000 feet deep. Whatever the lifeboat carried, whether it was panic or calculation, whether the people aboard it were alive or already lost when it left the ship, whether they had minutes or hours after it departed, has been at the bottom of that water for 150 years. What remains on the surface are only the questions. A seaworthy ship, a meal in preparation, a piece of fabric threaded through a sewing machine mid-project, a sword in the cabin and boots beside a bunk and a child's toys arranged as though Sophia Briggs had simply gone to the deck for a moment and would be back shortly. And the Atlantic, which received 10 people in December 1872 and has never once acknowledged that it did so. Still crossing itself with the same gray indifference it has always had. Whether the Mary Celeste gave up its crew to the sea, or whether the sea simply took them while the ship sailed on without understanding the difference, is a question the water keeps, without any apparent intention of returning it. Until next time, sleep well, my friend.